of us who fought for desegregation assumed that it would represent a better educational opportunity for our children. And most of us were advocates for the change, because even though our kids went to Anderson, a lot of our people worked in communities where they came in contact with Austin High and McCallum and Travis, and they saw the difference immediately. And so when the school board was ordered by the courts, it wasn't anything we did voluntarily. The courts ordered us to close Anderson High School and for the kids to go to probably basically Austin High, because Austin High was closest. But it was just transporting them there. There was a world of difference between that and when the courts initially ordered that students who lived in that Anderson geographic area, namely Maplewood and those areas east of I-35, that they go to Anderson. The courts, that was the initial ruling of the courts, that those kids would go to Anderson. They went one day. And it was so interesting because when the court ordered those students to go to Anderson, the Anderson High kids, the black kids, went to school that weekend, and they cleaned that school from top to bottom because they were welcoming these kids who were going to come. Not only that, but for the first time, AISD started putting furniture in the chemistry lab, surprise, started putting more books to make what had been the old Anderson comparable to the other schools in high school. They weren't there a week before the parents said, well, they weren't sending their kids there. They would rather not send them, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that really was true. I think that if they'd given them more time, they would have settled in and adjusted, particularly since AISD was beginning to make an effort to upgrade Anderson in terms of equipment and material and facilities and things like that. They didn't even give it a chance. It was Judge Roberts, and he ordered that the school be closed. And when he ordered that the school be closed, that meant that the Anderson kids were the ones getting on the bus instead of the ones who would have been coming to Anderson. And they went to McCallum primarily. And when they got to McCallum, they had all these, you can't call them riots because they weren't full-blown riots as we know them today, but they were, shall we say, not welcomed. They had all the end signs on the sidewalk and all of the hostility. Now, of course, they welcomed the football players. But I mean, all of the activities, and as a member of the school board, I insisted that if the girls had been on the pep squad or those drill teams and all that stuff at Anderson, then they would automatically be on them at the new school. Because when those kids were going to Anderson, the Anderson kids opened up all of their extracurricular activities, the student council, the cheerleaders, the band, all that, and said, if you held an office, we'll be co-officers. I mean, they really exemplified what you would call a welcoming group. And they were not imitated when these kids when they had to go to the other school. And it was a sense of, we have to do this and we'll grit our teeth and we'll do it. But it was never any welcoming. And to this day, when I go to games, and that includes the University of Texas, I count the blacks in the band. I count the blacks on the pep squad and those people that go out there with the flags. See, I came from a city where we didn't have all this hoopla over. A football game was just a plain old football game. But, you know, all the bells and flourishes that go with high school athletics in Austin were at Anderson, the old Anderson, and we were trying hard to have those same kids, because they were winning championships in that. It isn't like it was some operation nobody knew anything about. The bands at Anderson were state champions. The drill teams, the pep squads, all those kids were outstanding when they competed with each other. So I suspect that when they went to Austin High, they were teaching the kids at Austin High about routines and things that they never had done to any significant level before the African American kids went. So it was very painful. It was very difficult because so many black parents worked, and so they couldn't keep up with their kids. They couldn't go up there and monitor like they might have done at Anderson. The girls that did go on the pep squad, they were trying to raise money because those kids buy shoes and socks and wigs and clothes. And, I mean, you really had to have a financial support group in order to be a cheerleader or a band member or anything like that. And we were trying so hard to make sure that our kids would be able, if they were involved, able to do everything else that everybody else did. It was not easy. I'd be interested in any kind of dialogue that talked about where are they now? Because the black teachers were not sent with their students. If they were outstanding teachers, they went to the white high schools because they were the ones that integrated the faculty. If you were an outstanding English teacher at Anderson, they didn't let you follow your kids to McCallum. You were at Austin High at Travis. And a lot of our teachers were very proud, that now they were, because it was a mark of you, a recognition that you were an outstanding teacher. But they didn't do the whole thing, okay, all of Anderson is going to McCallum or Travis or whatever, or the whole ninth grade is going, including the teachers, the counselors. No, it was students, and the students who could get out went to private schools or just dropped out. I would be interested in the statistics in terms of the dropout, because I would promise that it would be significant. Also, those kids had to get on a bus every day. And it was well into their participation at Anderson that we finally provided a bus for them to come back after extracurricular activities. Most of the time the bus was there when school was out. But if you stayed for band or you stayed even to study in the library, you had to get home on your own. So all the fine points of making a transition were virtually lost. But over time, they kind of picked up because they could see the obvious impact. But it was not easy. I was on the school board from 68 to 74. I was elected to the school board 2 days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. That's how I got to be the first black elected. Blacks had run before, but they had never been elected. Mr. D. Whitty ran for the city council. Clara Walker ran for the school. I had heard, I was in Austin because my husband was in graduate school at UT, but my kids were in school, but my kids went to Reagan. My kids, we were in the wave that went, my oldest daughter, none of my kids went to Anderson because when I went on the school board, they were still in junior high, but they were at Allen. They were at Allen, at Pierce, someplace like that, because we lived right off of MLK. And they had nominally desegregated the schools so that kids coming out of elementary schools could go to the schools closest in their neighborhood. Because Austin, in defining desegregation for the courts, said that they would desegregate from the top down. And then the question was raised by the NAACP, how do you define all deliberate speed? Because that's what the court mandated. So then Judge Roberts ordered that Anderson be closed because there were a handful, maybe about 10 white kids that went to Anderson, and they said that was not significant. So they ordered Anderson closed, which forced the black kids to desegregate, not the white. When you had Anderson, you had the Anderson parents, you had the Anderson alum, you had Anderson sponsors. When those kids had games or they had plays, or the whole community turned out. If some girl from Anderson was given some kind of award, some church helped her to go. Now those kids are by themselves. Those kids have no support group. Because I would bet you that if you looked at the PTAs, for example, at all those schools that have significant number of black kids, you can count the blacks on those school boards on the fingers of one hand. You can count their participation. If those kids are in, my kids were in band and, mostly band. But if my kids went my husband was president of the band. We went to all the band things, but our parents, you have to look at the economic situation in East Austin. We have a large number of single parent homes, and those mothers work 2 and 3 jobs. They simply cannot. It's not a matter, it upsets when people say they don't show any interest in their kids. They don't have, their interest in their kids is putting clothes on their back and food on the table. I'll call it desegregation, which was prompted by a court order. The Austin School Board decided that they would only respond. They had no long-term plans for including these students. They responded to mandates from the court. When the court said, you gotta do this, they did it. But then they could blame the courts for the failure of the program. Well, we were gonna do this or we're gonna do that. But they could blame the courts, but I did not know of a long-term plan. I did not know of an alternative for kids who weren't assimilated well. You just flunked out of school, that's all. And there was no real value. There was, if you were an outstanding student, sure, there was one in every group. If you were an outstanding athlete, sure, there were 3 in every group. If you were a troublemaker, there were 10 in every group. The point I'm making is that you brought their perception, and I don't know with you, and I don't know that there was any structure there for either dealing with the possibility of it being different if it was negative, or dealing with counselors in anything but writing letters to colleges. And counselors were overworked because the reality was that they were the only face-to-face contact that the students had. And the students didn't know or understand or like the counselors because most of their face-to-face was negative. And I don't know of a situation in those early days, and I'm gonna tell you the truth. I have 9 grandchildren and all of them have gone through public schools. And I don't know in the instance where their mothers were always involved. My daughters were up there for their kids. But when mothers are not involved and fathers are not involved, unless that child is a straight up from word go genius or an outstanding athlete, that child gets ignored. And it doesn't take long for the child to get the message and start doing the minimum that they have to do. And if they can figure out a way to get out of school, that's what's on their mind. Our parents felt that the way up and the way out was education. That if you got a good education, you could make it. And so our parents were in those schools. Our parents pushed us. My mother used to always say to me, because there were 5 of us and I was the oldest, and every time one of us would go up there and get that good attendance award, perfect attendance, Mother would say, that's my award, because can you count the times I had to kick you out of the bed to make you go to school? But that's what they did. They said, my mother used to tell us, honey, unless your temperature heats up this room and the blood is running down the hall, you going to school. I mean, they didn't play that. And now parents aren't even there. You have all these kids that have kids. They don't want to be bothered, and if the kids, as long as they're not in their face. Well, this is a tradition that they have not, and that's the whole gang mentality that says, I pay more attention to my peers because they're more punitive, they're more accepting, they're more rewarding. They care about me much more than anybody in my community does. And that's the reality. If somebody in the community saw you go in the store and take an apple, they say, what are you doing? You better put that back, you know. But now older people are scared of these kids because they carry guns, they carry knives, they run in gangs. And so you just turn your head and look the other way. Old people are afraid to stay in neighborhoods. They're afraid of their own kids. Now that's the reality, and if you don't have that parental community support, the schools can't do it by themselves. And the kids don't have a value for something that they don't perceive as valuable to them. We always thought education was valuable. For my daughter's kids, I have 9 grandchildren, and there are 6 of them with college degrees. One of them did decide, he said, I'm a blue-collar kind of guy. He works, but he works very hard. And 5 of them have college degrees. He does not. He's 27, he does not. I have 2 in college and 1 in high school of the 9. So they know what is expected of them. But that has to come from us. And kids tend to congregate around the kids that agree with them. So it's not like, since I live on the same block or I know you and your mother, that I'm going to follow you. If you up there, I had a grandson tell me once he couldn't get good grades because they always teased him and told him he was acting white. And I told him, I said, you know, they're saying then that by virtue of if you get good grades and you working and you learning, you're acting white. That's saying blacks are naturally dumb and they don't get good grades. Well, no. I said, well, what are they saying? They're saying that they've set the standard for them way down here. And if you're up here, you're not eligible for their low grade group. Is that right? And he had to stop and think about it because that's a reality. My mother had 5 children, living in a housing project, divorced. All 5 of us had college degrees. All 5 of us had college degrees because mother said that's the only thing that nobody can ever take from you. And that's what I passed on to my kids. And I don't think that mentality exists today. And we can't blame it all on segregation or desegregation or white people. We have to look at our value system. We have to look at what, do I know where my kids are? And if they tell me they don't have no homework, do I believe them? No, my mother didn't believe us. She said, well, if the teacher didn't give you no homework, you read over the chapter that you had yesterday. But I mean, the whole value structure isn't just the schools. No, the schools are not doing their part. Because to them, it's a blessing that they don't have to worry about us. There are other reasons and other places they can blame us. And there are groups of black organizations that are out there trying. But it's got to be a community effort. It's got to be acceptable. It's got to be rewarding for you to do it. Because people have other options. And the kids, really, people are afraid of kids now. And all these boys walking around here with their pants around their knees, most people are scared of them. Because if they pull up those pants because you told them, they could reach in that pocket and get a gun or a knife, and it wouldn't bother them a bit to shoot you. Because that's the way they're treated. That's the way the police treat them, and that's the way they respond. I don't think we can blame the public schools. I think we have to blame our own communities and ourselves. We got a church every 3 doors. And the reality is that except to take up the collection, to raise money to build a bigger church, where are the priorities?